We're back live tonight on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. There are calls for the medium-term budget policy statement to include an increase on all social grants and aligned with the inflation rate. People also want an increase to the social relief of distress grant for the unemployed, and concerns have also been raised on the improvement of education in South Africa, that it should have core components including safe and sufficient infrastructure, school transport, textbooks, desks and chairs. For more on this, we are joined now by Amanda Rinquest, the Head of Education and Training at Black Sash, as well as Jane Borman from Equal Education and Researcher there. Ladies, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Tabo. Good evening.
All right, Jane, let's begin with yourself. I mean, if we listen closely to what the President said, all of maybe a paragraph or so around education, does it signal to you that he is, of course, also signaling to the Minister of Finance to prioritize this particular sector? Here's what the President said. He said the number of children who received the early childhood development subsidy has doubled between 2019 and 2022. So 1.5 million children are now receiving subsidies. They are streamlining requirements as far as those subsidies are concerned so that more children would receive. He cited the performance of learners from poor schools, which are steadily improving when you look at the numbers in 2021 and 2022. I think we are looking there at a 64% pass rate in bachelor's pass in no-fee schools is what we're talking about. And then he said, confirming the value of support that government provides to them. And then schools must be safe, allow for effective learning and teaching, and there are calls to expand vocational education and training. And he also cited something like 55,000 appropriate toilets built by the Sanitation Appropriate for Education Initiative alongside a CD. I mean, that's a sum total of what he cited there around education. Is that enough?
Well, unfortunately, at Equal Education, we feel that if you look at the speech in total, education got a very, very small mention, although he did highlight some important components. We feel that the reality of the crisis that is facing the basic education system is really, really, really dire. And, compared with, say, another crisis that we're facing, which is ESCOM, basic education is really not getting the attention it deserves, we believe, from the President and from Parliament. Yeah.
You said there was a little bit of the backtrack or a bounce back from the previous midterm budget by the previous Finance Minister Mboweni, where he tried to, cover lost ground and put back some money that was taken away from the education sector, basic education in particular. How far did that go?
Well, unfortunately, if you look at the state of basic education, you will see that 70% of schools don't even have libraries. You still have schools that don't have reliable water, don't have proper sanitation. In this environment, where the basics aren't even in place, a large amount of money is needed to be invested in order to get schools up to the basic standard that will allow for learning to be possible. While, we have seen that funding for basic education has regained ground after COVID-19, we are still not seeing funding back to pre-COVID-19 levels. And obviously our schools are facing a variety of new challenges to overcome the learning losses that we saw with COVID. So while we are seeing that we're not seeing the same level of cuts to basic education funding that we saw during COVID, funding is still not keeping up with inflation and still not keeping up with growing learner enrollment. And that is a great concern for us.
Yeah, having some challenges with Amanda's connection there. We'll try and get her on as soon as she is available there. But Amanda is the Head of Education and Training at Black Sash. So we'll try and make that connection. But Jane, while I still have you on, so talk to me about what you would want to hear from the Minister of Finance, particularly when we are talking about deepening the campaign or even the project of improving our infrastructure in schools?
Well, firstly, I think there needs to be a recognition of the crisis that we are facing in our schooling system and that our children are facing every day when they go to school. We are calling that the education blackout, that the fact that learners every day across the country are, fighting and overcoming obstacles to get to schools that are not properly resourced to allow them to be able to learn. And we need, although there are positive things that can be talked about, improving pass rates, etc., we feel that hides the reality of the crisis that is underlying a lot of these small improvements that we're seeing. So we want to see that recognition, first of all. Secondly, we do want to see that funding keeps up with inflation and keeps up with learner enrollment. That means that we won't be worse off than we were last year, and that's very, very important. We also really need to tackle the fact that there are serious issues when it comes to spending, not just in basic education, but across government. And one of the ways in which, this can be moved forward is we hope there will be some commitment around the public procurement bill or the draft public procurement bill, making sure that gets passed through Parliament and gets implemented as soon as possible.
Yeah. Amanda, there are concerns, hopefully you can hear us and we can hear you, that the basic education has not been made a frontline sector when it comes to how budgets are allocated. What is your understanding of why this has been so?
Good evening, and I'm sorry about I don't know why the camera just won't stop working. In my previous life, I worked with education and education funding, but and right now at the Black Sash, what we believe is the core issue is a non-people focused approach to the budget, whether it be with school learners and the school nutrition program, scholar transport, or whether it be with child support grants, foster care grants, disability grants. The focus is not through a lens of what the needs of people are and how we dramatically address that, especially the basic need of feeding people. There seems to be a missing lens in which we recognize that while it's important that we finance and we fix the projects such as SAA, such as BRASA, such as ESCOM. In the meantime, people don't have food on the table. Learners are going to school hungry. And so what we want, I think Equal Education probably feels the same way, is for Minister Godongwana to elaborate on what the President said last week tomorrow, but to make sure that there are some practical ways in which we recognize the needs of people and how the government is going to address that.
The National School Nutrition Program is one program that has not received any new funding in particular and seemingly has not been prioritized even in the time of COVID-19. So, Amanda, if we are to hear something significant from Minister Godongwana around that particular program, what are the changes that you would like implemented?
Well, I think for the Black Sash, the key changes we want is for us to pin grants against what is a realistic number. 480 Rand for a child support grant is not a realistic number. What we do have is that Stats SA releases annually what is called the food poverty line, which is the minimum amount you need in order for you to survive, what you need to not starve, and that amount is pitted at 663 Rand. That's the minimum amount a person living in South Africa needs to not starve. And so that is what grants must be pitted against, not this idea of what we think we can afford, what we think is going to be decent enough. It must be pitted against what is a statistically and researched amount of money.
Right. Jane, the government, according to the president, quite ready to spend money on improving skills. 800 million money to be provided by the National Skills Fund in 2023 to develop skills in digital and technology sector. This, of course, is at a vocational level. But do you think that kind of spend is also supported by what is happening at basic education level so that it feeds into this kind of program where skills will be developed?
Well, I think the ultimate starting point where, people living in South Africa start their education, start their learning, start their skills training is basic education. And, we are dealing with a situation where investing money in foundational learning, which is those first stages, the first couple of grades of basic education, is so vital, because that is the key time where children are able to pick up and develop basic skills that will stand them in good stead for the rest of their lives. That investing in that will not show any outcome for a number of years, because those learners have to complete their basic education. So there is also the necessity to have skills development at a later stage to be able to help individuals who have completed their basic education but don't have the necessary skills to be able to get a job in this extremely tough job market that we sit with. So we do believe that is very important, and those types of interventions are very important. But again, if we are not making sure that while we're doing those interventions, a huge amount of our focus is on ensuring that everybody in South Africa gets the necessary skills and training in their basic education, we will have to constantly be doing these types of sort of band-aid interventions, rather than fixing the core issue, which is the basic education system is not providing proper learning opportunities and setting up learners to be able to enter the job market.
We are discussing, of course, budgetary needs and requirements for education in the country that should be prioritized in the minister's speech tomorrow. Now, Jane, before we go back to Amanda, I wanted to find out from the point of view of equal education, when you are saying this is an education blackout, I suppose you are very much pitting the education crisis to what's happening with the energy crisis in the country, and maybe in a sense even calling for that particular sector to be also declared a disaster at this point.
Yes, what we are really trying to say is that, the electricity blackouts have gotten a huge amount of attention, which is warranted. It is crippling for small businesses, for families. But we're also wanting to say and draw a parallel to say there's another crisis that is happening that is also crippling our country, that is also crippling, families and individuals' futures and children's futures. And we need to get the same kind of attention on the basic education sector that Eskom is getting at the moment. And we need to get the same kind of political will to make sure that necessary changes are made and drastic changes are made to make sure that all children who are living in South Africa get a proper basic education, which is their constitutional right.
Amanda, are we getting closer to government realizing that the SRD grant should now be a permanent feature? However, the many glitches that, of course, it comes with, sometimes there are more people who are able to access it than those who are rejected or kicked out by the system, but also the fact that, of course, it has remained at 350 since 2020. Please unmute Amanda there. I think we don't have your audio. Oh, we seem to have lost the audio there to Amanda. All right, we'll try and make that connection with Amanda in just a moment. We have her picture, but don't have her audio, or rather we have her audio and don't have her picture. Some of the challenges that we are having to deal with here tonight. Jane, let me come back to you. The three-stream model that the president highlighted to say we must now begin to expand on this particular system. Have you had a look at it as equal education, and looking at it in the context, of course, of the numbers that are beginning to emerge? For example, how you explain the 64% improvement in bachelor passes in no-fee schools and the overall improvement in achievements from 76 to 80% in 2022?
Well, of course, we are obviously very happy and thrilled that there was an increase in the pass rate this year. And, learners worked extremely hard, matriculants worked extremely hard for that. However, I will say that we believe at Equal Education that the correct or the more accurate way of assessing success is looking at the throughput rate. That requires us to look at not just which portion of those who wrote matric actually passed, but which portion of learners entering the schooling system who were present in grade 2 made it all the way up to matric and were able to pass. And there we are unfortunately seeing that it's not as much of a success story as we would hope. And while, Equal Education is pleased with all of the gains that have been made in the 3-stream model and further, we really believe that the base level that we are dealing with is still completely unacceptable. The fact that you still have so many learners dropping out, not even getting to the point where they can write their matric. And on top of that, you have so many learners who are working so hard and passing, but maybe not getting a pass mark that allows them to progress in a career that can and provide them with meaningful employment. We are still seeing that there are too many cracks in the system.
And you are still pretty much linking that dropout rate to socioeconomic challenges and the lack of support in terms of, for example, livelihoods in families as one of the key driving features.
Yes, definitely. And part of the education blackout campaign that we're running around this budget is to really look at, learners very often drop out because they are struggling in school, because they are disengaging in school, they are unable to learn. And we must look at the fact is, why are children who are going to school, who want to get an education, unable to learn? And the education blackout campaign shows that children are arriving at schools that are overcrowded. They are arriving at schools where there isn't proper infrastructure, where there are no libraries, where there are no toilets. And although they are there, no learning is happening. And this is what leads to a high amount of dropout, on top of other, broader community factors. And we really need to highlight the fact that we are letting down learners and children across South Africa by the fact that we expect them to go to schools in such terrible conditions and just expect them to be able to learn.
All right. Amanda, let's try. I think I heard some audio coming from you. I wanted to put your question on the social relief of distress grant. One, do you get a sense that there's a realization from government that this has got to be some kind of a permanent feature, but certainly maybe even an entryway into the basic income grant? But two, then talk to some of the features that need to be corrected here. One is the inconsistency in being able to access the service and the level at which, in terms, it is sitting now as compared to the cost of living and inflation.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm so sorry about this. I'm sorry to your viewers also. So on those two issues, I think that we're hopeful that this will become a permanent grant. Minister Godongwana, during the ANC conference, in his political hat and not his hat as the minister, did say, look, it's not at a point now where we can take the SRD grant back. It's been 3 years. People have come to rely on it. So that was in his political context. The president has also said that, he's alluded to the fact that this is going to become permanent, that there are pathways, that they are creating pathways to make this a permanent grant. So we're hopeful about that. But the modalities and the amount, there are so many changes that the Black Sash is calling for. One is that the grant is below the food poverty line, almost 44%. So 350 grants is not sufficient, especially because it's not in line with inflation since 2020. The second is the way in which it is being distributed. There are now less people receiving the grant because there are so many hurdles to it. One is that the application remains in English only. Even though it's the third year now, it's only in English. It's only an online application, which just creates this digital divide against those who don't have. And then we've also seen some uncertainty about the post bank and post office, which has made it difficult. So we are hopeful that this grant will become permanent, but there are lots of things that we want to be prioritized and budgeted for to improve the system.
Yeah. Speaking of the system, there was in my previous conversation with the Minister of Social Development also talk of linking the database of this Social Relief of Distress grant with creating employment opportunities. So the thinking is that those who remain or those who enter the system do not remain in the system. There needs to be some kind of channel that is created towards giving them at least employment opportunities. Was that just merely a dream or just posturing, or is there a realness around how they are approaching that?
Well, we want to believe the best intentions of politicians, but these intentions are proven through what is budgeted for and what is announced tomorrow, and when the Department of Social Development and Minister Zulu gives her speech, her budget later on in the year. And that's how we believe whether these things are just words for politicking or whether we're really trying to help people. The important thing to remember with grants is that it's not a grant or a job. Grants help people apply for a job. They help people survive while they're looking for a job. They help people travel to jobs when they're applying for jobs or when they're busy applying. It helps them print CVs. So we don't need to put jobs and grants next to each other. Grants make people more economically active, which creates employment. And so we are excited about the idea of linking SRD grants to employment opportunities.
Yeah, interesting that you are linking that the grants are actually a vehicle also somewhat to finding jobs. But then again, I mean, when you look at that, we know what the cost is for looking for work in the country, and there is no real direct link between that. So you have somebody who will receive a 350 grant, and they'll decide whether do I use this money to go on a taxi to go find work, or to make photocopies of CVs, or to go to an internet cafe, or do I buy food?
And that's the difference between the grant amount now and the grant amount in 2020. When the grant first came out, you heard all these stories about people starting ice cream businesses or using the grant to buy vegetables to sell. People could make more choices with that, even though that amount was small. Now, with the rising cost of food, the rising unemployment, the cost of transport, Eskom, rolling blackouts, people have a limited choice with what they can do with 350 Rand. In fact, they have almost no choice. It's food or nothing. And so that is why we're asking also for the grant to be increased, so that people have more choices with their grants so that they can also be economically active.
Are you concerned at all with what is happening at the post office currently? I mean, some challenges there, some 6,000 jobs also going to be lost, but an indication that there is a cash flow challenge that could see the post office actually being affected.
Yeah, the post office has been an important point for the Black Sash for several years now, ever since Minister Dlamini made the decision to move grant distribution to the post office. And Black Sash has always called for a capable state and has called for SASSA to do their oversight job to make sure that the post office has capacity and has the ability to distribute grants. Over the last few years, we've seen several incidences where there's been capacity concerns and several incidences where we don't think SASSA may have done its correct oversight. And so now that it's moved to Post Bank, and there's a different model. We once again want to say that SASSA must continue to exercise oversight over SAPO and over the Post Bank. Bank must be people focused. And if this move is already starting out with so many people losing their job, it is worrisome. Because 6,000 people means 6,000 less capacity to hand out grants to the millions of people who need grants, who don't have to stand in long queues. And so we just hope that the Minister of Communication as well as the Minister of Social Development are keeping their hand on this, as well as the state-owned entities who are supposed to do that.
Right.
We want this to be people-focused.
Ladies, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. Amanda Rinquest, Head of Education and Training at Black Sash, as well as Jane Borman, researcher at Equal Education. Right.